Welcome to the U3 Media Podcast, where our mission is to unite the world through coffee, connecting you to the farmers and coffee entrepreneurs through the stories they share. I'm Christy Ross, and joining us today is Tim Volkema, CEO and owner of both Schuil Coffee and Sparrows Coffee. Welcome, Tim. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So, you have worked for Amazon, Kraft, Deloitte, even owned your own restaurant. So you basically came into roasting or into the coffee business from the outside.
Yep.
So what did you see as the market opportunity in coffee?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I liked a couple things about the industry, but I didn't necessarily target coffee specifically. So when I was looking for my next opportunity, I was thinking about purchasing a business that had no succession plan in place. And the area where I live in Michigan, there are just a lot of family-owned businesses, and some have, really well thought out succession plans, and some do not. And so there were a few irons that I had in the fire, and the coffee one ended up being the best fit. But a couple things about the industry I do love is that it's not cyclical, and so you don't have to ride the cycles so hard up and down. And not that there's no seasonality or cyclicality, but it's minor compared to some other industries. And it's food, which I've loved for my whole life. So, especially my older adult life, I've really gotten into it and enjoyed it.
I'm right there with you. So you've been in coffee, though, for like the past 5 years or so, right? Is that timing right?
That's pretty close. So, yeah, I bought Schuil 6 years ago.
Okay. So what was special about Schuil, though? So you said you looked for someone with no succession plan, but why Schuil then?
Yeah, so Schuil is interesting because they were the first specialty coffee roaster in Michigan. They were founded in 1981, so early days. And Gary Schuil was a food importer, and so he would go to Europe and look for things to bring back to the States. And the coffee was pretty good over there. It was not pretty good over here. And so he saw an opportunity. And this is, again, people don't remember how scarce specialty coffee was in the US back then. So he started roasting and then handed it down to his daughter, Greta. And then she just, I think, was ready to get out of the business. And I had met her nephew when I lived in New York, and we became friends. And so when we moved to Michigan, he made that connection, and one thing led to another. But Schuil has done a great job, I think, over the years at consistently providing high quality beans. So, it's second wave in the sense that because it's a product of its time, it has flavored coffee, it has dark roast and light roast. It really has a full spectrum. And so coming into the coffee industry new, I was like, that's interesting because it's serving a lot of different types of coffee drinkers. And so it'll be interesting to figure out how all that works.
Yeah. Well, and so there's Sparrows, and I think that was in 2019. Did you acquire that one too?
We did, yeah. So Sparrows was Lori Slager founded Sparrows 12, 13 years ago now as a coffee shop. At some point, she started roasting her own coffee, and we had a mutual friend, and she was just at a crossroads because she had opened a second location, and you know how those go sometimes, and that didn't, it was like mid-block, parking was tough, so she just was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do next with this business. So I was like, and I was, there's like a market segmentation thing that can happen in coffee too, where again, Schuil has the full spectrum, but there's obviously a super vibrant third wave that is more focused on high-end coffees, and I thought this would be an interesting opportunity to have a couple different brands serving some different audiences. So I took that brand on, and then she actually kept her shop, and we licensed the brand back to her for free, and she worked with us like in our marketing department for a while, and it was great. It was a good fit.
Yeah. So then, so you have two different brands. Are you going to keep the two brands then? Like, what's the strategy behind that going forward?
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoy having the two brands because I think there's some overlap, but in general, Schuil is more oriented toward grocery, and it has that full roast spectrum. It's got flavored coffee. And so like if I needed to fill up 10 or 15 bulk bins in a grocery store or just have like a very big shelf set, Schuil is a great fit for that. But like we partner with Trade, for example, the subscription platform, and Sparrows is a much better fit for that. It's just more narrow. It's more focused on the sort of artisan end of the market. And so I like that flexibility. And then I started a brand with my daughter called Joven, and that lives under the Sparrows umbrella. So it's kind of that same price point, quality level, but focused on young farmers. And that's it's a nice brand for that to live under as well.
Well, so mentioning your daughter, it seems like you literally have made a dedicated effort to involve your family in this business, like creating that sub brand. So what's that experience been like? It's not always easy to work with family, and yet on the other hand, it's one of those things where you can trust them, implicitly.
Yeah, I mean, we started when she was young. So we started she started tasting coffee with us when she was 12. And so she was just so young at that point. And it was just a nice way for her and me to connect on something, spend time together. And so I don't know what it would have been like if she was older when we started, but she's been great to work with. She's, talented and for us, we sort of know our roles. She's very into selecting farmers, and she's a great ambassador for the brand. But she's a high school student, and so she's got like she's on like the tennis team, and she's got like her things that she needs to do as like a regular high school student. So the back end of the business, the financial side and the production side, a lot of that is still fits into our overall organization pretty well. And so I think because we know our lanes, like it's worked very well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, our prior company, I was co-CEOs, and you have to define your lanes, and then then you can go really fast. But if you're crossing over, it can create problems. So the one thing when you look at Schuil and Sparrows and acquiring those, the consolidation in the industry. I mean, you see a lot of that now. Fairview, I think it is, and all of that. So do you have other brands on your radar? I mean, this is not all about you divulging your secret strategy, but I am curious, because as you dive in, it's a lot of times as you do one or two, it starts to like pick up speed. So just curious.
Yeah, I'm always open to having those conversations. So if it's out in California or somewhere really far away where it'd be more difficult to manage, that's less appealing to me. But we have the conversation always. Like anybody reaches out, I'm always open to having that discussion, because having been through the process once where I took a legacy brand and with a great team around me, revitalized the brand side of it, I'd say at least, and then transformed the business in ways that diversified it through some more channels. Doing that again would be a lot of fun, and I love that opportunity. So yeah, totally open to that.
So what would you say that as you entered, the coffee industry, what would you say is sort of one of the biggest surprises? Because once you dive in and you start to open those different doors, was there something that actually surprised you?
I would say the biggest surprise I had was just how at every step in the process you can mess this product up. So like it's crazy where with consumer packaged goods, I have a little bit of background in that industry, and generally speaking, you're putting something in a package and somebody opens that package and consumes it, or maybe mixes it with water or something straightforward. But coffee is like you have to grind it right, and you could buy it ground, I suppose. And then you have to have the right ratio, and you have the right water temperature, and that really has implications on the commercial side too. When you put coffee in workplaces and other cafes or restaurants, it's so much of the end consumer's experience is not up to you, and that was hard for me to get used to.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The complexity, all the way from the soil on the farm, to
Totally.
the roasting of the beans and the storage, and
Yeah.
so I'm totally with you on that.
Well, and I was going to say that it's even, and that's before I learned the cupping process, right? That's at least if we're starting there, we say, okay, we're buying this green, and we know its quality level, we know some things about the farm, uh, but yeah, I mean, even to get to that point is a lot, and then you take that as a starting point, and then you've got all these other layers after that.
Yeah, totally agree. So I think one of the things that surprised me the most is you have the U.S., which I know is a massive country that consumes a lot of everything. And so in $85 billion, business last year, what surprised me is that Japan is number 2 with like 40 billion. And then, Italy, France, Germany, and I don't know, Spain. I think that those 4 combined is like 57 billion. I just didn't expect that. I expected Europe to be way ahead of us, especially from a combined standpoint. But glad that I'm in it. Glad that I'm in the U.S. But I want to go back to the cupping process for you. Because you went and you got your Q grader certificate. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, that's the area where I think I fall down the most. Is the sensory is just starting to learn that process. It takes a long time to really sort of perfect that. So talk about going through the Q grader process and what that was like for you.
Sure. So, I mean, coming into the business, it occurred to me pretty quickly that I needed to get a little smarter about buying green coffee because it's such a huge input in terms of your cost structure. And so I hired a consultant who I'm friends with Helen Russell, who owns Equator out in California. And she had somebody who she knew who was doing some consulting. So his name is David Poole. He's great. And he taught us how to cup. And he's a Q grader. He's a Arabica and a Robusta grader. So he just has a ton of experience and really brought a lot of expertise in-house that Schuil was, I think, great at being a local coffee roaster and servicing clients well, but they never really, at least not the second generation, I wouldn't say nerded out too much on the cupping side of it. They relied quite a bit on their importers for that, which is fine. But David really brought some additional expertise to us, and I just enjoyed it, frankly. I didn't know the vocabulary in the beginning, and so that took a little time. And then once my daughter started showing an interest in it and doing some cuppings with us, that's actually when I decided to pursue the Q, only really to do it together with her. I was like, let's learn this together and up our game at the same time. And so that's what really spurred us to get the Q.
That's fantastic. I have 3 wonderful girls. My middle daughter loves coffee. She actually is the first one that said, I want to go open a cafe. So I am looking forward to that, but she's in college. And so it's the same sort of thing, the timing, and, she's not not local here at school. So I'm hoping got a couple more years. Okay. So in talking about Schuil and some of the things that they did well, some of the things that maybe changes you made, was there anything within Schuil that you considered untouchable, that you kind of vowed not to change? Because when you acquire maybe a well-respected brand, you want to honor the history, but you also want to pave your own way, maybe aggressively, maybe not as aggressively. But how do you balance that too?
Yeah, I was really careful in the beginning not to mess with the product. So they have such a loyal following here in the Michigan overall, east side and west side. And that's through grocery, through the store, through other wholesale accounts. I just didn't, even as I got better at cupping and got more familiar with the green purchasing process, I didn't feel like I wanted to change things too drastically. and that meant a couple things. One was quality level, and the other was variety. I mean, we have a lot of items, a lot of flavored coffees, a lot of non-flavored coffees, just decaf of like every kind. So it was a lot of items, and I was like, oh, great, we could probably really whittle this down. And then I discovered over time that that's one of the huge differentiators for us, is having that extensive variety. And so we just figured out how to manage around that. The other piece I would say, and it speaks, I guess, back to the quality, because again, flavored coffee is a very interesting sub-segment of the market. It's smaller, much smaller, and typically the quality of the base is not good. That's the idea. Like you have kind of, I don't know, very average coffee, not usually specialty, sometimes past crop, who knows, and you flavor it to cover that up. But Gary never did that. Like he bought really solid, 82, 83, like nice, generally like Brazil, but like it was, he's trying to be somewhat cost effective, and then just use that. And so I was like, that doesn't make a lot of business sense necessarily, but we have this crazy loyalty on that side of the business, probably because we use absurdly nice coffee for flavored coffee. And so I didn't change that either. And so we just figured out how to make the margin structure work through purchasing. But that was, those are a handful of things that we wanted to keep sacred.
Okay, so you have my understanding is you have a number of sales channels and these different brands you manage, and maybe some co-packing agreements with other brands. How do you assess your own growth needs when you take on those types of projects too?
Sure. Yeah, we have a limited number of pounds that can run through our roaster, and we're not close enough to that ceiling yet where I sweat too much about it. Now, if Chick-fil-A was like, "Hey, we would love for you to roast our coffee," I'd be like, I honestly cannot do that. I'd love to, but I can't do it. That's too much. So, within reason, we are still okay on the capacity side. What's happening is we're actually running out of storage, and so the roaster itself is probably not our bottleneck, but it's a consideration. And so, like, for co-packing, take that for example. How many items do you need? Where's the packaging going to be stored? Are you providing that? Are we providing that? So it's all those types of questions that would play into, one, do we work together? And two, what does the pricing look like?
Yeah, right. And so as CEO and running a couple different companies, I mean, how do you divide your time and energy? We had 7 companies within our company, and we had to hire literally multiple, presidents or CEOs of those subsidiaries. I mean, how do you end up dividing your time and energy?
Probably not as well as I should, frankly. But we do this thing. A couple of years ago, we started on EOS process. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's got like a visionary and an integrator, and then it's got a heads of each business unit. And so I currently only have one direct report, and that is our integrator. And so we've taken that structure on, but in a more general sense, I try to focus mostly on growth and company culture. So like all the kind of major growth initiatives I'd be in charge of managing those and reaching out as I need help, and then just being sort of the steward of our company's culture, reinforcing our core values, both at the time of hiring, we evaluate our people on those core values. And so that's a big role of mine too. And then I'm like a little bit of a spreadsheet person, and we're not large enough where I have like a full-fledged, finance department, and so that is me. And so I do a lot of that too.
So Tim, I'm a spreadsheet person too. Okay. I started out my career in accounting, in finance and trading. So, but I am new to coffee myself, fairly new, but I'm not new to building businesses. I think one of the things that has had an impact on me and has helped me connect the dots in the industry was traveling to Origin. So have you traveled to Origin a lot, or have you, do you have a number of countries that you're scheduled or committed to visit?
Yeah, I've had mixed feelings on that. So Frankie, my daughter, and I went to Colombia and met with a lot of the youth farmers. So our travel has been more focused on that Joven brand than anything else. And then COVID hit, and so we traveled not at all during that period. We're heading to Brazil in about a month to look for some more youth coffee coming out of Brazil, which is a pretty interesting origin in some ways, especially from like a processing standpoint. So I would say I've traveled minimally and not as much as I want to. COVID was clearly a part of that, but also our importers, the folks we've aligned ourselves with, do a very nice job, like on the ground at origin, and give us the information we need to play our role in the supply chain. So I've always felt like I'd love to travel more, but other things have just sort of jumped in the way of that in terms of priority. But yeah, we've certainly gone to Origin, and I've loved it, and it has been really illuminating and makes you appreciate like what we do is pretty easy, to be honest. Like the whole like roasting, packaging, there's logistics involved, and it's not to say that we don't work hard, but it's not farming, and there's so much more complexity and variables outside one's control. It's a hard job, and just total respect for that.
I feel like I have a much deeper, greater appreciation for every single cup of coffee that I drink, and I've always had an appreciation for it, but it's different now. It's
I
much
agree
more.
with that.
Yeah. So, okay, so you founded a restaurant as well, and you've served on a number of boards. You were a consultant for Deloitte, which I always feel like anybody who starts in consulting at one of the larger Big Four,
Yep.
whatever they call themselves these days, you gain so much around data and taking the 30,000-foot view on industries, But I don't want to answer this for you. Looking back, what role or what company best prepared you for what you're doing now? And how did it help you?
Yeah, that's a tough question, I guess, in the sense that, just as in your career, I'm sure you've had different experiences at different stages. So like you said, starting at a large consulting firm, doing strategy consulting I view myself more or less like I was a kid back then, and learning how to be a professional. You're really thrown into the deep end as a consultant because you're talking to pretty senior people at your clients, and the expectations of your analyses are high. And so it was like, you better be good and perform. And that was, I think, a really helpful way to start my career. And then craft, I think, provided a lot of interesting, it provided an interesting perspective on thinking about the consumer and just putting the consumer first in every situation, and backtracking from that and figuring out what makes the most sense in terms of product and packaging and all of that. And then, in terms of like day-to-day applicability, both the restaurant thing being an entrepreneurial venture and just really having to do and know about every aspect of the business, that's applicable to what I'm doing now. And then Amazon too. So Amazon is a pretty serious place with a lot of processes and a lot of really smart people. And I learned a ton there, and specifically around e-commerce. And that's a part of our business that has grown a lot over the past 4 or 5 years. And I don't know that I could have done that without that Amazon experience.
Yeah. No, that all makes sense. And I agree. Everything builds on the experience you've had, right? So it's sort of collective, especially, when you look at like this stage of our careers. But so one of the things that I've done is over 1,000 interviews of founders, CEOs over the past 10 years. But I'd always ask for, hey, what's your best piece of advice to someone who wants to start, XYZ in, whatever. In this case, let's call it restaurant owners. The funny thing is that restaurant owners, their their phrase to me, their best piece of advice is don't do
Don't
it.
do it. Yeah.
So, but then all the other industries, their phrase was like Nike, just do it. Like you just dive in, you'll figure it out kind of thing. So when you look back and you go, okay, I have that restaurant experience, in my pocket, and you're doing coffee, it's, is there a best piece of advice you'd give to someone who wants to start out in coffee?
I think the industry is so big, and it's with big industries that they have a little bit of romance to them, like coffee does, wine does, restaurants do. They can be very competitive, and this is very competitive. So the advice I would give anybody stepping into the coffee business or wanting to get into it in some way is develop a point of view beforehand. Like, why are you, just because you think you want to have a coffee shop or have a coffee brand online, like whatever it might be, ask why the world needs that, and who do you think is going to be really interested in buying that? What segment are you targeting? And it can't be people who like coffee, because that's 70% of the adult population.
Right. That's true. So it is. It's about how are you going to differentiate yourself, or what are you personally bringing to the table? So I totally agree with that. Okay. So as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, what are 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
First, I would say steady. Like, I'm not very emotionally up and down. Like, good news and bad news, I keep generally in check, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. Pragmatic. So I really try to distill like what needs to get done, like what's the deliverable, like with this conversation, and really put feet to the floor on what the next steps might be. And then growth oriented. Like, I really don't have as much interest in a steady state business that's just sort of the same thing. I get a little bit. I love new things. Trying to also balance that with the pragmatism you need to make sure that the stuff you're doing is going well. But I do like growth initiatives, and I'm attracted to those parts of the business.
Yeah. No, I love that. I mean, those are good qualities to have as a leader. So can you share one general coffee industry stat that you find interesting, fascinating, or a stat that you now religiously follow its progress besides coffee future prices?
Sure.
As a trader, coming from the trading world, that certainly is something we watch anyway, but it's something, when you're in the industry, everybody's watching that for prices and for their own business. But any other coffee industry stat?
When I think about our business, we have 2 cafes, but the vast majority of the business is coffee for people who consume at home. So for us, the stat about how many adults drank coffee the previous day, whether it's like 70% or whatever it was last year, is interesting. But this at-home consumption number of just over 50% is something we track. So if we start to see, people are really migrating toward coffee shops or migrating back to home, it's critical to our success, given where we're distributed, that people are still loving the idea of having coffee in the morning or other parts of the day at home. Yeah, for sure. So is there a coffee publication that you reference that helps you keep up with the trends in the industry, or is there a best business book that you've ever read? So I guess those are really 2 questions. 2 questions, yeah. I'll take the coffee one first. I think that, like, just the weekly emails, or maybe they're more often than that, actually, like from Roast Magazine or Daily Coffee News, are helpful just to see what's happening in the industry. I'd like some physical magazines, so still get Barista Magazine and flip through that. So, but I would say the one I spend the most time with is probably Daily Coffee News, and then there's Fresh Cup, and there's some other ones that also provide nice synopses of coffee-related news stories. But that's how I keep up on the industry. Best business book. I like Jim Collins because he's so well researched. I feel like his conclusions are implementable, but they also come from this deep research. And so, Built to Last, Good to Great, they're all so good. And those are the ones that I tend to go back to if I need some additional inspiration.
Yeah. And so on your comment first on the physical magazines, there's something about a physical, magazine or publication. I don't know if I always thought it was my age, but I think it really is just human nature to want to feel, touch it. And Roast Magazine, particularly, the feel and touch and quality
Beautiful.
of not only the actual magazine itself, physically, but also the content in it. So that is one that I really like as well. And I could not agree with you more around some of the best business books that he's done regarding the research, because I'm a numbers person. And I'm a person that I want, facts and just facts that have been proven out, right? Numbers that have been proven out, kind of thing, or processes that have been proven out. I think that's why I love coffee so much too, is you look through all of these different processes. Okay, so along those same lines, is there a random fascinating fact that most coffee consumers probably don't know, like something that you either knew or know now after diving in?
What's interesting is, and I didn't know this before I got into the industry either, but that there's been no crossover, and this maybe goes back to your earlier question about what surprised me. There's no recognition or knowledge of like this grading scale. Like there's commercial coffee and specialty coffee, and there's ranges of specialty coffee. There's subsegments, and it's just never. I mean, I think on the consumer side, we tend to talk about origin, and all of that's great. Flavor notes, all super important. But this idea that there's this numerical scale that we all use to determine the price of a coffee, and that just has no crossover to consumer language. It's really interesting. And so every time I explain it in like a setting of, whatever, like an office we're talking to or whatever, they're always like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, I have not come across anyone who's like, oh, yeah, totally. I know what you're talking about. It's interesting.
I agree. It's funny because in entering the coffee world, I'm like, oh, it's really saturated. There's no really place for improvement. It's been around forever, and yet I couldn't agree more. As I dive into this, there's this huge gap between the end customer and coffee professionals on what we what we base everything on. And even talking to someone who consumes a lot of coffee, I go, oh, okay. So do you like natural wash or natural honey washed or full washed? And they're like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, some of those things that are really change the flavor of the coffee. But anyway, so yeah, I agree. Okay, so I am going to shift into what I call the U3 top 3, which is very brief answers and just sort of one-word answers here. Is your favorite brewing method?
Drip. Could be pour over, could be Chemex, could be a machine, a good machine, but drip is my favorite.
Okay, and for consumption, like your coffee drink of choice, hot, cold, black, latte, different wash.
Yep, I have 2, and I either have black drip coffee or a cortado if I'm going to have an espresso drink.
Okay, perfect. And how many cups of coffee do you drink per day?
Like 3 or 4 small ones. I usually pour 6 to 8 ounces, and 3 in the morning, maybe 3 in the morning, and then maybe 1 in the afternoon, or maybe not. So it's not a huge number of ounces. Yeah.
But what I've found is that anybody who's a professional in the industry, most of them are black coffee, which is, absolutely. I mean, they appreciate the coffee for the actual taste of the coffee itself. Okay, so Tim, thank you so much for your time. I want to give you the opportunity to share where someone can learn more about you or more about Schuil Coffee or Sparrows Coffee?
Yeah, great. Probably the easiest place to go for that is our website. So schuilcoffee.com, that's SCHUIL coffee.com, or Sparrows Coffee, and that URL is brewsparrows.com. And then Joven Coffee, you could also go to jovencoffee.com, which is JOVEN coffee.com.
That is perfect. Thank you so much for joining us, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And for helping us unite the world through coffee. And thanks to you, our followers, for joining us at U3. We'll see you next time.